Just a reminder again, this is another of the FASTTRAK webinar series. Today we'll be covering pricing options, establishing pricing structures, how you set the basic pricing up, including zone pricing, as well as touching on geo pricing, and also how you establish special pricing plans, as well as pricing for customers. We'll just be going over the basics here, just so you have a good understanding of how to set the pricing plans up and where they can be utilized. We will have a future webinar that gets a little bit more deeper exploration into especially the geo, how it can be utilized. So today we have, let's see, Adam. Well, Adam's not here today. We do have myself, Brian, and a surprise guest for those that missed him the last couple of weeks. Eddie McCoy has returned to our presence today. So if anybody has any questions for him, he'll be happy to answer them.
Welcome to all of you.
Okay, so today's webinar agenda, as I stated, we're going to be talking about pricing plans. We'll be dealing with the default pricing plans, as well as special plans that you can set up within the program, as well as customer-specific plans. There is a difference between the special plans and customer-specific plans. We did address that a little bit in the last webinar, but we'll go into a little bit more depth in this one here. Some of the things we'll be talking about, not only setting up your basic pricing, but creating zones and how to utilize those in the reservation process. We will be touching the geo pricing today, how it is set up, some of the basic functionality of it and what you can do with it. Also talking about multiple pricing plans being utilized for both a customer as well as for the online traveler, which means that they would be able to select from multiple pricing plans, not just one pricing plan. And then we'll have a summary recap at the end of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into a little bit here. In a previous webinar, as you recall, we did talk about adding vehicles and vehicle types. I'm going to touch on that here a little bit because that is the basic premise of starting all your pricing. Keep in mind that when you add the vehicle to the your list of vehicles available to you by clicking on the vehicles and maintenance, over on the left side, as we addressed in the previous one, this is where you would add your vehicle to the list, vehicle type. By selecting the add option, we can go ahead and add one in here. I'll make this very simple for today's. Set a color for it, any basic color, keeping in mind that the number of passengers and bags and images, those were that you can select for the online, as well as they are available to be online or not. Once you add this vehicle type to the system, it's going to ask you a question about whether you would like to set up your hourly pricing at this time. This is referring to the default pricing. You can either select yes and continue, or in this example, I'm going to select no. I'm going to cancel out of there. Now the vehicle will be added into there. The reason I selected no to that is this issue comes up a lot. We get questioned this a lot about people will be trying to do certain things within the system and they keep receiving a message stating that they have vehicles without pricing set to it. That one I just added, as you see, if I click the add button down here in the lower left, it now gives me the option to enter the price for this vehicle type here. Had I entered the original price in the beginning, that would have already been populated there. But this enables you to later come in here and add the pricing to that particular vehicle. So now that we've jumped into there, as you can see, here's the message that you would receive. Let's go ahead and go up here to the menu, go to the pricing management. When you come into the pricing management, you're going to see on the left side a list of all of your vehicle types. These are the vehicle types that you had entered back in the vehicle and maintenance section. Normally, you would just see your types in here and anything else. If you had established an hourly rate or minimum in there, those would already be populated in there. Right now, we're addressing the default pricing. Default pricing is a required pricing plan for you to have in the system. It is basically your retail rates, your rack rates, or whatever you may want to call them. But the default pricing plan must exist. Whether you utilize that plan or not, you can set up additional pricing plans later that can be used for different customers. But we do have to have a base from which we start all of our pricing. So over on the left side, again, I'm going to select the Add button. I'm going to come up with the list of vehicle types that do not have prices established for them by selecting the drop-down list there. I'm going to enter in a hourly rate. This would be your base hourly rate and the minimum number of hours. Now, this is not generally associated to transfer rates. This is normally my hourly rate, such as an as directed or maybe a meeting or something to that effect. By entering in the minimum hours, that is the minimum number of hours that the reservation would be booked for upon creating the reservation for this type of vehicle. Keep in mind, you can always change that within the reservation if you need to adjust that. This is just stating what the minimum will be. And especially if booking online, that minimum would be the 4 hours there. Down below here, we have 2 additional things, items, if you would, that you can add on to the basic hourly rates for that vehicle. These 2 items here are entered up underneath the system global settings. As soon as I finish this, I'll go back and address those where they can be entered. These could be additional hours. They could be other items that you want to add on to the reservation automatically. By selecting the OK, you'll have to trust me, but that actual vehicle is now added to that to the list of vehicle types there. The other things that you will want to add on to your default pricing and or any special pricing plans, but we're going to work for the default currently, is your fixed charged items. By selecting the fixed charged item pricing, you'll see that I have the ability in here to add different items to the vehicle costs, the reservations. Some of these have zeros in them. Some of them have actual numbers in them. You may enter them as zeros because we don't know if they will exist on reservations. Other ones that we do know exist on reservations, perhaps an administrative fee or whatever additional item you may want to add on there that you know exists on every reservation, you would want to populate with a value. A zero value allows you to later add an amount there when you are costing out the reservation. To add new items in here, selecting the Add option down at the bottom. I also have an Edit and a Delete, which allows me to edit and delete any of these. But by selecting the Add item, it tells me I'm working in the default pricing. In here, I can type in the amount or the description of what may be added onto the reservation. We suggest that you add items in here even though they may have zero values, but they are items that you may at one time or another add on to reservations. It could be as simple as additional stops, bottles of water, any item that may at one time or another pop up in a reservation. You would just simply enter them as a zero, but you do have the ability when costing the reservation or pricing the reservation to be able to enter that amount. Keep in mind, if you leave it as a zero, it will not show up on any printed documents, such as confirmations or anything else like that. You'll see that there's something here called cleaning fee. Probably don't want that to show up every time unless it actually needed to be. But in here, I can put an amount. I'll put $5 on this one here. I have the option at this point to pass it on to a driver by selecting the pay to driver, and then I can select how much I'm going to pass on to the driver. 1%, 100%, anything you would like there. You also see I have the ability down below here to only pay if the driver is a contractor. So perhaps there's some fee, maybe tolls that you pass on to contractors, but you are paying for your own fees on your vehicles, tolls. You may not pay that to your driver. That would only be passed on to a contractor in that instance. Down below, there's a couple other items here. Item can be quantified. What that means is once in a reservation, you can select how many of them. If you glance up here to the left, you'll see something that says bottle of water, $5 each. Don't know why it says $5.50 over there. But what that does is inside of the reservation, it allows you to select a quantity, such as 1 bottle, 2 bottles, 3 bottles. I'll demonstrate that once we get over there. Price is fixed and cannot be set. This is a driver app option. That means the driver cannot adjust that rate. If I were to leave this as 0 and not check this, the driver does have the ability to add that into reservations, as also right here allows them to add it in there. And there's another option here that allows customers to add this item when booking online. And what that would mean is if I had this selected to allow customers to add this item when booking, in the booking process, they could say, yes, we need 1 bottle of champagne, or yes, we need a car seat with that reservation. And they can select those items and they will be automatically added into the cost of the reservation. You also have the ability to select ground, arrival, or departure. That determines what types of reservations the particular items show up on. You'll see many times people will have something called airport parking, and it may have a value of $5. I'll go ahead and add that in there for now. Put it as $5. Obviously, we're not going to let the customer select that. What I would do in this one here is I would select for arrivals, perhaps a departure, but normally just arrivals. I could also have another one called just parking with no value to it because I don't know when it's going to exist. And I would select only ground for that particular one. So as you can see now, I have something called airport parking with a $5 value, which will show up on all of the reservations. And then I have a parking item of 0 amount because it may or may not appear. The reason we suggest doing this is it allows you to create reports later on of how much airport parking you did as opposed to other parking such as sporting events. Variable fee items, these are percentages that you can add on to reservations. By selecting the add option, you'll see that I have the ability to create different items. I can put in a percentage, and again, I have the ability to pay it to the driver. Normally, this would most likely be your gratuity or service fee, whichever your particular authority has you labeling that gratuity, and a percentage to it, pay it to the driver or not. And then below that, you have the ability to select which items that 15% in this example applies to. Hourly rates, the base, something. If this is a gratuity, you should select this as a gratuity. This does not affect day-to-day operations. However, this does come into play if you're using some of the integrated GPS systems such as Transponet or Groundspan. They have a marker that indicates gratuity. Down below there, you also have the ability to determine what that 15% applies to. Does it apply to parking? Does it apply to car seat? Does it apply to bottle of champagne? Once I select those items, that 15% would then be applied to each one of those items. Now keep in mind that if you do add a variable, and then later on you go add more fixed charge items in the previous section there, you will need to come back in to edit that variable item if that thing does apply to any of those new fixed charged items. And again, down below here, you can select whether it applies to ground, arrival, or departure. Some organizations pay different percentages for airport runs than they do for as directed runs. That way you could have one that was set up to run for airports and one that was set to perhaps do arrivals or grounds. Now, my mouse seems to have taken on a mind of its own. Pardon me. As you can see, edit and delete each one of these. The tax charges are other items that you can add on to reservations. These could be many different taxes. By selecting the add option below, again, we're always addressing the default pricing because that's the section we're in. I could call this anything I want. I could call it local taxes, out-of-town taxes, regional taxes. Select, pardon?
VAT.
VAT for those in overseas. Select the items that it applies to. One thing I did neglect to mention in the other variable part there is you'll see that some of these items have behind it something called customer, 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 customer. Those are indications that those are a specific pricing item that exists only in a customer profile. We'll address where those are entered, but these are not general items. These are only specific to a particular customer. So again, adding my taxes in here, select what it does apply to or not by leaving them blank, and then I select the add button down at the bottom. As you see, all we've created is a tax item. We have not created any percentages or any such labels for them yet. So clicking on the OK option, I now have the ability to create my various tax items. Keeping in mind 0.78 is 0.78%. Normally you would have 7.85%. Location could be whatever you want to call it. Again, these are internal markings only. Call it local state if I would. I can have as many different tax items in here as I want to select from during booking a reservation. This would come into play if you have different municipalities that base charge is based upon where the reservation starts or ends. You may have to select different ones based upon the type of or where the reservation's going from. If you have ones that apply all the time, I would normally just have one in here with it applying all the time, or I can have multiples to select from. So I could have another one in here, 8.0. Local 2, and again, let's call these general things. That enables you to select which one you would like from within the reservation. By clicking on the OK, you'll see that in our list here now, we have two different tax items. These are both able to be selected within a reservation. Some places have multiple taxes that need to be selected. This enables you to have multiple different taxes. This allows me to select one from many different taxes on there. So again, that's our basic there of tax charges, variables, fixed charges, and vehicle pricing. Now, within the pricing structure, what we have is the ability to also create zone pricing. Zone pricing would generally be point-to-points, such as airport to various locations, or various locations to another location, based upon the way that you have your pricing structured. I'm going to go ahead and go out of this one, and I'm going to go over to the new zone test. It's a little bit cleaner and easier for everybody to see here. As you'll notice, one thing here within my new zone test, I do not have all of the vehicles that I had stated within the default pricing, the vehicle types. This is an important thing to remember. In default pricing, you must have every vehicle type priced out. However, in any of the other ones, you do not have to have all of the vehicle types priced out. You may not offer all of your vehicle types to each of the different pricing plans there. Inside the zones, zones are essentially price zones. They may or may not be geographic zones, but generally they are pricing zones. If I go into my manage zones, if I go in here, as you can see, I have different prices set up within my pricing zones. To add a new zone, you click on the add option over here on the left side. You create the name of the zone. The name of the zone is only important internally, as an online customer would never see this. There's no need for you to worry about labeling zones something that would be recognizable by them. You can call them simply City Zone 1, City Zone 2, Zone 101, Zone 102. They're just merely references for you to label them as. Set in a state for it and click OK. Now at this time, all I have done is create a zone. The zone still has no definition to it and no pricing to it. The next thing you want to do after you have created the zone is you need to define the zone. There are two ways to define a zone. Zones can either be defined by cities, or they may be defined as postal or zip codes. This really depends on how granular the pricing is within your organization. Some areas will price strictly to a city, and then they will have a list of cities in here. It could be test city, 1 city, 2 city, 3 city. What I'm doing is I'm creating a zone which contains a list of cities. All of these cities in this example would have the same rate based upon the routes that I'm going to create later. You can further define this by postal codes if you need to. One of the examples I normally give with this is to our area, Scottsdale, here in the city of Phoenix area, is a very long city. Now, the south end of Scottsdale is approximately 5 minutes from the airport, but the north end of Scottsdale can be over an hour from the airport. So in that example, I would never price Scottsdale as one price. I would have Scottsdale as my city, and then I would further define the specific zones. I may have a test Scottsdale Zone 1, Scottsdale Zone 2, Scottsdale Zone 3, and in each of those, I would have different postal codes, depending upon where I was breaking up that city. Once you've added your zone, by clicking on the Save button there, you'll see that the zone is now listed over on the left side there. Keep in mind, you always have the ability to go back and edit this zone if you need to change the cities or the postal codes on that one. If we go look at this one here, Phoenix or City Zone 1 and City Zone 2, as you will see, these are two zones that are located in the Phoenix area. One of them contains two zip codes of 85022, 85028, and the other one contains 85033 and 85034. So I've created two separate zones there. Once I have created my zones, the next part is pricing the zones out. That is what this center part here is, the zoned fixed rate pricing by vehicle type. By selecting the add option down in the lower right-hand corner, I'm then given the ability to price out these zones. I select my vehicle type from my list. In this example, we'll go with the 12-passenger limo. I will select a price. This may be an hourly rate or a flat rate. Normally in point-to-points, we're dealing with flat rates, so I'll go ahead and put flat there. Estimated hours. Keep in mind that the estimated hours is only used as a dispatching tool on your reservation and dispatching grid. You can still change that if it is going to actually be longer than that. Driver pay. If you are giving a driver a specific amount for each one of these transfers, you would want to put that amount in there. So for example, we have not set the to and from yet, but for this particular one, maybe the driver was getting $15 as opposed to their normal hourly pay, which we set up in the previous webinar on employee pay. This would be the amount that they were getting on these fixed transfers. What that means is you have two different ways to pay your drivers. You can either pay them hourly based upon the hourly pay, or you have the ability to override it if you have specific pay amounts for fixed routes. You also can do driver pay for driver-owned vehicles, basically a contractor at that point, and an affiliate pay. If you always have a certain amount you pay affiliates, you could put that amount there. Anytime you assign an affiliate to the reservation, that is the amount that they would be paid for that reservation. So once we've selected our vehicle type, set up our rates here, then we proceed to select the from and to. The from, in this example, I'm going to go ahead and select the test zone, which we just created a second ago. And I'm going to, in this instance, make it to an airport. My departure airport in this example, again, all I do is start typing, select my airport from the list, and as you'll see, it marked it as a departure. It knows that I was going from a zip code to an airport. If you want to create the reverse for this prior to saving, select the option here that is automatically create the reverse. This will save time as it'll automatically do the opposite route. You don't have to go back into it. Over here on the upper right, you'll see that you have the ability to add other items to this particular route. For instance, if you knew that this particular route had tolls and you knew that the tolls were going to be $5, by selecting that, this list, just so you know, is created every time you add a new one into the items here, then it's selectable in all of the other point-to-points. But again, if you know that this has a $5 toll, I would select that. Put in the $5 there. If you know there has a specific tax, I would select the tax. It's applying a 2%. And if that tax is automatically applied to that toll, I select the option there to apply that. Now, clicking the OK button here, you'll see that it created the both routes for that. I have a test to Phoenix Sky Harbor, and I have a Sky Harbor to test. Looking in here, the various things that you can see is I have ground. These are ground. That means it's from, in this instance, zone 1 to zone 2. I also have departure, which is from zone 1 to the airport, Sky Harbor to zone 1. Some of the other things you can do in here, if you were going to, you wanted to add all of these items to another plan that you already had existing, as you can see down here at the bottom, you have the ability to copy all items to another plan. By selecting that, I can then copy it over into any of my other plans if I wanted to. So perhaps I was consolidating all of my pricing plans. I can move all of these items over into another one there. Now, one thing I did not address, and I probably should have before I got to the new zone test there, is as you see here, there is a list of various pricing plans. In order to add those various pricing plans, you need to select the Add option at the top, type in whatever the new plan would be. I can either copy over any of the existing plans, or if I want to create a whole new plan that does not match any of my other existing plans, I leave this as none, and it will be a blank plan. We do have below here wait time that can be added on to reservations. Let me explain what that is here a little bit. If I have a, say, a 5-minute wait charge there, and then I put in $2 per minute, and I could call this as I please. What this does is it calculates from on location to the actual pickup time. If the vehicle is on location on time, and the customer, say, does not come out for 15 or 20 minutes, after 5 minutes in this instance, it would begin to charge $5 per minute as you waited. Once you got to the finalizing and costing, and again, that will be shown and demonstrated in the finalizing costing webinar, you would be able to calculate that wait time. At that time, you could either override it or clear it out if you needed to, if it was a particular customer. But it does have the ability to automatically calculate wait time based upon the scheduled pickup there. If you have a plan that you are just working on and you don't want available to be able to be selected from within reservations, you would probably want to hide that. Perhaps you're working on a plan for 2020 or whatever it might be, and you don't want somebody to accidentally select it. By selecting the hide plan, it is available for you to view in here as you go into price out or create your pricing plan, but it would not be available to be viewed from within a reservation. So as you see, it has the hidden tag after it. And what that means is if I'm in a reservation, I cannot utilize that to price a reservation. You can later go back in and unhide it once you're ready for it and hide other plans there. A couple of the things that you can also do in here is I can adjust my rates. I'm going to go back over to the default pricing plan. I can adjust my rates by selecting the adjust rates. I can increase or decrease my pricing by a percentage. I can apply it to hourly. I can apply it to zone. I can apply it to fixed variables, whichever I opt to. And I can round it up or down, depending upon if I'm increasing or decreasing, or do not round. So if I were to increase my pricing by 10%, apply it only to the hourly rates, and round it up by to the nearest dollar, it would automatically increase all the rates in here for this particular one. Keep in mind that this is applying to the default pricing. Any plan that I'm in, if I were in the, for example, the 1, 2, 3 Deluxe, I can adjust these rates accordingly. It is only adjusting those rates there. I also have the ability to adjust my wait times anytime by selecting the wait times there. There is also an option here to adjust customer and corporate overrides. And what this means is I can go in and adjust customer and corporate pricing. That is when a customer or corporate account has an adjusted rate, not their own special pricing plan, but an adjusted rate. We addressed that in the last thing, but I'll touch on that here in a little bit. It allows you to adjust their rates as well. Okay, so this is our basic pricing, general pricing, default pricing, and any special pricing plans we may have in there. Keep in mind, any plans that I add within this area are available within any reservation. If you have a special pricing plan that is associated only to a customer, that pricing plan should be added only within that customer plan.
Hey,
One other thing, yes?
Randy had a question about going back into zones and creation of zones. The matching, I know you touched on it, but it's the matching logic where a zone contains both a city name and zip codes. And your answer was that if you put city only, it's going to capture basically all zip codes within that city. If I have a city and specified zones, it will only match to those 2 zones that I put within that city. You want to expand upon that for him, or is that correct?
Well, the way it works is the first thing when it is trying to get a price for the reservation, it looks at cities. If there are 6 zones with the same cities in them, then obviously it wouldn't know what to do beyond that point other than show you those 6 zones. However, if you have zip codes in those different pricing zones, it then goes down and looks for the zip codes. So if you had, in the instance I had there of the 2 city zones, both Phoenix, the first thing it starts looking at is it looks at state, it sees Arizona, then it goes down and it finds Phoenix, and then it says, is there anything below that? And it says, oh yes, we have a couple of zip codes here, let's try to match one of these zip codes. So it works its way down until it finds the most granular match before it presents you with the price rate. That answer that question?
Yes.
Okay. And again, if you had no zip codes in there, then yes, it would bring you 5 different zones with all of the ones that had city in there. Keep in mind, if you do price all the way down to zip codes, you do not need to enter in cities. You can merely put in zip codes there. Some people do it for convenience to know that, okay, these are Phoenix zones, these are Glendale zones. Or zip codes, but it's not necessary. If using zip codes, you do not need to utilize cities. Okay. Geo pricing. This was recently added, I want to say probably about 1.5 years, couple of years ago. It's been adjusted a couple of times. We've made a couple recent adjustments to it, which should make it more usable for the end users out there. Some people may or may not have come across the geo pricing, stumbled through it, been confused by it. That's probably expected in some of them. Keep in mind, we do have a help file up here in the upper right that you can always download anytime you need to if you have any further questions on that. Or you're always welcome to email support@fasttrakcloud.com. and we can set up a time to go through there. So in here, again, I have the ability to add, edit, or delete any of these particular geo pricing zones.
Hey, Brian.
Yes?
Generally stated, geo pricing was developed and designed to be a bridge between specific local point-to-point or hourly pricing in a metro area that we might serve, a local service area, and recognizing as the world became more, our service area became more global, the reach out, the necessity to be able to do business in other countries, other states, it became impractical to have a list of point-to-points for Boston and for Chicago and for San Francisco and for Atlanta. Some people do for a particular client. They maybe say, hey, we only go from the airport to their plants, and you can do that. But as a practical matter, when I'm trying to serve more than one service area in a region, or I'm trying to serve a global market, geo pricing is where you want to be, because it will allow you then to establish pricing in various areas of the globe and not have to list specific point-to-points necessarily. True?
Yes. Okay. Now, okay, so once you create the geo pricing, what you're going to have is something called a primary pricing rules. This is a rule set that applies to all of the vehicles and all of the reservations that would utilize, in this instance, B-Test Geo. I'm going to try to pick one of the simplest pricing plans we have here so we don't get overly complicated. Again, this whole thing will probably be addressed in much more detail in a future webinar. I just want to give you guys the basics on this and some of the things that you can do, as well as go explore some of yourself and see if you can get it to match up to your prices. So in here, when I add a primary rule set, and all I did was double click on that option there that said the rule set, what you'll see in here is you have several options. Now I can copy over other rules. I have a whole bunch of things in here. Incremental duration, I have distance charges. That's one of the things that's different about the geo pricing, is that I have the ability to create pricing based upon time and or mileage. And or was the specific very important part there, because I can have it deal in both time and mileage. And I can deal with base rates on it too. If I select any one of these, I have these trip distance charge. You'll see that these have zeros in there. I'll explain why I have zeros in these at the moment. Stops, I have the ability, as you can see, to add different stops in there. Let me go ahead and add one so you can kind of see where I'm getting these different items in here. If I select on this add new rule, I can go in here and add a time of day variable or fixed. That allows you to have prices changed based upon time of day. Maybe you have early morning fees or late fees that you add on to it. In this example, the time of day, I have a time of day charge. I charge it on ground arrival and departures. It starts at 10 p.m. in the evening, ends at 5 a.m. the following morning. I can select which days it applies to. In this instance, I have it on none. And I can also select which particular item it charges to. Normally, I would have after hours charge selected there. And I'll show you where that amount is entered here in a second. To add a new one in here, whoops, I'm sorry, I need to get out of there first. Let's go ahead and save that. Okay, cancel that. How about that? Yes, let's go out of there. All right, so in order to add a new one, I select from this item here. And again, I have time charges, I have distance charges, I have wait times, everything I want in here. In this instance, I'm going to go ahead and select additional fixed charge item, add a new rule. Everything I'm adding in here, keep in mind, is applied to every reservation or every vehicle type that is within this pricing plan. So the one I just did here is this. I can select an amount for this. and then select what it applies to, ground arrivals or departures. And again, I can label it anything I want. In this instance, I'll just call it a fee of $4. That's pretty vague. Most customers won't ask what fee means for $4. So those are my primary pricing rules. Those, again, cover all vehicle types, all reservations that would utilize the Geo pricing. Down below there, I add in specific vehicle rules. I'm going to go into edit the sedan here. I'm going to click on the edit. I select which vehicle type I'm dealing with. I can select a minimum amount that is going to be on this reservation. I could say that's for every 60 minutes. What I've basically said now is every hour it's $75 an hour, and you have a 1 hour minimum on that thing. Same thing we did over on the other way, just a different way of stating it in here. I could have a minimum of 3 hours. What that means is every reservation I create is going to have a 75 times 3, 225, I believe, off the top of my head, which will be the base rate for that reservation. If and only if you select this minimum as base rate. So if I don't select the minimum as base rate, what it does is when a price is calculated for a reservation, the minimum it can be is $225 on this reservation. Now, once the reservation is all completed and all the mileage and all the time is all added up, it then goes down and it starts looking at the other items here that we have, an incremental distance or time, if we would. Whichever would be greater would be the price that it would utilize. That is if I have this option unselected here. So if the distance, say I was charging $5 a mile and the total miles covered was greater than the 225, it would use the total of the mileage. Same thing with the time. If the time was greater than the 225, it would use that amount there. However, if I select the include minimum as base, it starts with 225, and then it will start adding on the duration or distance based upon my rules that I have set up for that. So if we go back here, and we say we have a 1 hour minimum, and we're including that in the base. If I come down here a little bit further, let's go look at our distance, trip distance charge here at the bottom. What this says here is I have a distance charge of $5 a mile. So what it's going to do in this particular reservation is when the person gets in the vehicle, there's an automatic $75 charge. Every mile that they go is going to be adding on an additional $5. Now, I could have free miles. Let's say the first 10 miles are free, and then we start adding on miles by selecting free 10 miles. That means 10 miles, we're only going to deal with the $75. Once they get to the 11th mile, it's going to start adding $5 every mile they go beyond that point there. So what that is basically, again, is I guess a minimum, a base rate, a flag drop, if you would, in the taxi world. And then we're going to start charging $5 a mile after our first 10 miles. This could work in several instances. I have zone pricing, but everything within a 10-mile circle, I only charge $75. Once we get outside that 10 miles, then I take the 75 and start adding mileage onto it. So If you're creative, you can create, I guess, concentric circles around particular places such as airports, and then create your pricing accordingly. I also have the same ability, if you look here, with my incremental rates, duration in this particular one. So I may charge $75 for the first hour, and then maybe I charge $1 for every minute after that. What I would do over here is I would obviously make this 60. So the first hour is $75, and then every minute after that, we're going to start charging $2 per minute. These are all based upon the total cost and time elapsed on a job, as well as the estimates based upon Google mapping. And I can save that there. Now, you'll also see I have other things here. I have a variable charge. I have a 10% variable charge that I've added on to the reservations. Now, these, as you see that are gray here, we're actually pulling from the other one here, excuse me, I forgot the name of it, the primary pricing rules that says that it's 10% on every reservation. Now, I could adjust it by doing so. I could have a, each vehicle could have their own gratuity. If I were to go here and select the variable charge item, add new rule. Keep in mind, I'm only dealing with the sedan S-Class here. Go to that variable. I can call this gratuity, say 15%, pay it to the driver, select what it applies to. So effectively what I've done is I've created the ability to either have a gratuity that applies to all of the reservations, or I can bring it down even further and say each one of my vehicles have different gratuities on the different reservations, if you would. So let's go ahead and save that and get on out of there. Go ahead and close that and go on out of there.
Brian, Sheldon's got a quick question about Google Maps and getting the mileage from pulling that from the Google Maps. Can you cover that for him?
What's the question?
When you mentioned Google Maps in terms of this pricing, are we, in terms of getting the mileage driven, where's that mileage being calculated from? It's Google Maps, we know that.
Okay, let's go ahead and look here. The Geo Test Pricing, I probably should have addressed how to add one of these also. But as you can see, the add, edit, delete there. Let's go ahead and go edit this one, because this is going to tell you how that pricing structure is created. In here, I'm creating this pricing plan, description of it. I'm selecting what types of reservations this particular plan applies to. I do have the ability here to validate my service areas. Now, what that means is if I look here at the B-Test Geo, over here on the left side, I have something called Phoenix Zips and B Phoenix Test Airport. Those are created here in the managed service area. I'm going to have to come back and address that. If this particular pricing plan is only valid within those service areas, which are based upon zip codes and airports, then I would select Validate Service Area. What that means is that if I'm pricing Phoenix Airport reservations, it's going to use one of the plans. If I'm using Boston, it's going to use the Boston plans. It will know which zone or which pricing plan is valid for each one of those based upon this. If I leave this blank, meaning I don't check this, what this effectively means is I can get a price from anywhere on the planet to anywhere on the planet. Yes, I could, if I leave it unchecked, get a price from Hong Kong to Scottsdale. That was to you, Eddie. Now, obviously, I don't think I can get a car across there because I don't think they have the bridge quite finished, but you could get a price. Now, obviously, you wouldn't want to allow that. So in most cases, you are going to validate your service areas. How it calculates is selected here. Include the company address as where I start my calculations, which would mean it will not start calculating my mileage from the actual pickup, but it would start calculating from wherever my office is. So effectively, we're doing garage to location. We're starting our calculations there. I also have the ability to end my calculations based upon my garage. So what effectively I've done is I've created a garage to garage pricing plan. Or you can utilize the pickup to drop off by leaving both of those unchecked, or select whichever one you want there. There's another option here. Use scheduled pickup and expected traffic congestion to help determine the shortest trip. So there's two ways to calculate trips, especially time and routes within Google. You can either calculate the shortest trip being mileage, or the shortest trip being time. If you are selecting the shortest time routes in your pricing, and your routes are based upon mileage, keep in mind your customer may get different prices every time they go to look up a price, because it's going to be utilizing different routes. If you're using the shortest route, then it will always be utilizing the same route regardless of the time of that route. So just keep that in mind. You may have a customer that says, hey, it was $35 yesterday, why is it $45 today? Because you have a mileage-based pricing structure, but it's looking at the shortest routes. So keep that in mind. That will affect different things there. You also have the ability to say when this pricing plan is in effect. So if I were to say that it is only valid, for instance, July 1st through the 4th or through the 5th, effectively what I could do is create a, as Uber calls it, surge pricing during holidays. This enables you to increase prices during specific times or bring it down to its normal amount there, whatever you want. This comes into play with other things such as Super Bowl, New Year's Eve, things like that, where you only want specific plans to be available during specific time frames there. Did that answer that question for Sheldon? Yes? No?
I think so. Sheldon will let us know here in a second.
Okay. All right. So I know that there is a lot of items within both of the types of pricing, the hourly zone-based pricing, which is the older method, still a valid method, and many people utilize this, as well as the Geo Pricing, which is the new method of pricing. Keep in mind that if you're going to explore the Geo Pricing, be prepared to adjust your prices from what they may have been for the last 15 or 20 years. One of the things that I can let you know, we get a lot of pushback on, is that people will, I've been charging $85 on this route since day one of my business. When I use the Geo Pricing, I'm coming up with $85.27 or $82.75. If you're going to utilize the Geo Pricing, you're going to have to be prepared for a little bit of flexibility in some of your pricing. I will also say that especially if you are trying to compete with some of the other ones that are out there, such as Lyft or Uber, they're not using the old pricing methods of $50 an hour, which our industry has been built upon. They're using other methods, mileage. It's pretty straightforward. So just a little opinion there, but keep in mind that if you are going to explore the Geo Pricing, your prices will start to fluctuate. Over the long run, we do believe that it will be beneficial to all that utilize that, especially helps online as well as customer pricing there. So There is a lot there. I know we've touched on several things there. There's still a lot more details. We will have future webinars that go over those details there. This conversation could go on for several hours, but in order to not have a webinar that goes on forever, a couple other little things.
Brian, before we get out of this area, I do want you to go to the reservation and kind of show them how the Geo works within a reservation. But it's really important to remember that when you're setting up pricing here, you have everything at your fingertips. Your reservationists know these routes and they'll know if a price came up correct or not correct. But in designing your price plans and those that you want to expose in the online portal to either regular customers or new customers, you've got to remember that they are basically trying to hit a target with only a couple of factors to go on, and it's a date time certain with any parameters you might apply around that date time, a pickup point and a drop-off point. And from there, we can display for them the prices that you've configured for those zones or that pickup and drop location. Many, many times I'll have people call and say, look, my clients are all getting back that there's no prices available for that area. And that's because the client, we don't know what the client's typing in. You may not know what the client's typing in, but you've got to look at it and say, if I'm going to expose this to the general public, I better have my bases covered. Obviously, someone looking at your website is going to be booking into your service area, you hope. But in many cases, they may want service there and service in London. So you've got to be comprehensive about the way you think about this, because the people on the outside trying to book in need direction. And that direction comes from having airports with the appropriate addresses in those airports and having pickup and drop-off locations that are identified within your zones that you've said to the online center, I want to publish these plans to the online center so that your customer booking portal will yield good rates. Very, very important. We get that question probably daily.
Okay. Okay. Two quick things I want to touch on, and then I'm going to show this within a reservation. Again, trying not to drag this on for too many hours here. One thing I did mention within the customer and corporate profiles, we did touch on this in the last webinar, but I do want to go over it again just real quickly here as a reminder. Inside the customer profile, I do have the ability underneath, keep in mind that they do have a pricing plan that is set to them. I also have the ability within that customer profile underneath customer pricing to create their own specific plans by clicking the setup customer sprite or customer special pricing. That was more difficult to say than it should have been. And I can add in here a well, I'll call it normal for now, the zone pricing, or I can also add in a specific geo pricing plan for them. Keep in mind, anything I add in here is specific to their plan or to their profile. These pricing structures all work the same way that we just covered over there in the other part there, just letting you know that you do have the ability to create special pricing plans for each of your customers. That is also available at the corporate level, which we addressed last time. Also, underneath the document options tab, this was recently added, but I think it's a good time to address it here, that if the customer does have online reservations enabled, by default, this, in this instance, would be the pricing plan that they would receive, the new zone test. However, if you had a customer that traveled in multiple markets, and obviously you didn't want to recreate every pricing structure for every market for this particular customer, you can go in here and enable multiple pricing plans for the online customer portal. By going in here and selecting from the drop down the options here, I have the ability to create and let that customer utilize multiple plans when booking online. So based upon Boston, their rates could be one thing, New York, Phoenix, LA, whatever it might be. You have the ability for them to have different pricing plans for different markets and enable it online. Last thing I want to touch here, and then I'm going to eventually get to this reservation, is underneath the global settings on the internet reservations, I have the ability to add in multiple pricing plans available to the customers online. Probably should review this one here. Well, let's forget that for now. I'm sorry. We just made a change here, and this is all going to change on how this operates. So again, I'm sorry I addressed this part right here. Anything I would be doing in this area right now would not apply to anything. So I apologize for that. Let's forget that little part right there. Let's focus on the other parts we had there. Let's do a reservation real quickly here. I'm going to go ahead and add a booking. And I'm going to come through a new customer so we can see something of how it's working here. In this instance, I'm going to select an arrival. I'm going to select a date. I'll just select today's date. We're going to start with the basic information here of American Airlines. We're going to go Phoenix, Sky Harbor. And I'm going to put in here, as you can see, I can start typing, and it's going to bring me the Point Tapatio to that. Now, a couple of pricing plans that I believe will work on this. We have the new zone test, one of the ones that we were working on there a second ago. If I go in here and I select my sedan, by selecting the little binoculars here, it brought me, well, maybe not that one there. This one here. Maybe that's better. Okay. As you can see, it flashed real quick. There was a list of all of my zones and pricing. But because this matched exactly Sky Harbor to Zone 1, now looking at it, I don't know what's in Zone 1, but if you recall when we set this up, one of the zip codes within Zone 1 was 85020. So by doing this, it brought that to me. I simply select that option, and it has now created the price for me based upon that particular point to point. One of the things get asked a lot is, why does this thing not automatically price that when I put in Sky Harbor to this location here? Basic explanation is I could be getting picked up at Sky Harbor and going to the Point Tapatio, but I've got 30 stops along the way and we're going to drive around for half the day. You don't want it to price at $12. All you're doing by selecting this little option and doing that is affirming, yes, this is a point-to-point. You'll notice in here, there are some of these things. These are the items that could have been added onto here. For instance, water. We discussed that being able to be quantified. It has a value of 5, but I haven't added anything onto it. So if I go 1, 2, 3, it's automatically adding those onto there. My taxes, as we discussed, are down here. I can select which tax I need to apply to that. And those are automatically applied to there.
Show quick, Geo, would you? And then we can.
Yep. Going here to the Geo, you had a whole bunch there, which is the one that Test Geo, I believe, is mine. Okay. So we've got the same route here. In this one, we're going to go select the sedan. Hopefully I have this set up correctly here. And when I click on the retrieve quote, it's going to bring its prices in a different way. As you see, there's nothing here. It doesn't know what I'm doing yet until I select the retrieve quote. In so doing, it does some calculations and goes out, talks to Google. Google comes back and says, okay, here you go. It has a start address of the airport, ending at the Point Tapatio. It gives me a route here. It is also giving me a little bit of information here, estimated distance, 15 miles, 24 minutes on that thing. If I click on OK, it's now going to bring in the price based upon the parameters I had set up within that pricing profile for that particular one there. Now, you'll notice that when I did that, it only priced from point to point. I did not have that set up to price from the office to there. Had I done that, I'd have to close the program and come back into that. So you're gonna have to accept that actually works. That I had it priced from the office. It would have started calculating from the office to the airport, then to the hotel, then back to the office. So all of my rates here, if I hover over that, I've got a minimum rate of $55. I could expand this distance out here. Let's go even further. We'll go all the way down to the Tucson National Golf Course. Now, $55, keep in mind, was my minimum, and the mileage nor the time never got beyond that. So let's go ahead and price all the way down to Tucson National Golf Course this time. And I think we're going to come up with a much greater price. We have 101 miles, an hour and 39 minutes. And as you see now, it's $110. So it's creating these things as I go based upon how far away I'm going. I didn't have to have a price specific to Tucson National. I just knew that my base rates and my miles were that, and it calculated accordingly. So yes, that's how both of them work. I know that kind of gave you the basics for it. There are a lot more details, and we will address those in a future webinar, going into more depth on how those work. Just basically wanted to give you guys the overall review of it, let you know where those functions are. Also reminding you that those help files are available there in the Geo. We'll go through those in more depth.
Brian, show them specifically where Geo is selected in global settings so that those that don't have it turned on can turn it on.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I forgot that entirely. Here underneath the global settings, on my system global settings, on my reservation tab, there is an option down here, or excuse me, up here to enable Geo Pricing. If I do not have this option selected, when I go into my pricing management area, I will not see the Geo Pricing tab in there. So if you want to be able to explore that, make sure you select that option, and then you'll be able to, it'll open up that tab for you to go into the Geo Pricing area there. One thing I do want to address, somebody mentioned last time in, I think in some of the answers, the survey afterwards, that there were some of the areas that we were covering that they weren't able to get into. Keep in mind that almost everything within the program has a security level to it. Some of you may or may not be able to get into these specific areas, but if it's something that you feel that you need to get into or want to work, make sure you always talk to your supervisor or owner and say, hey, I need to get into this area to go over this stuff that was covered in the webinar. And again, like I said, some areas you may not have access to without those permissions. So just keep that in mind. Everything has a security level to it. So that concludes today's webinar. Unless there's any other questions or anything else like that, I want to thank everybody for attending and look forward to seeing everybody next week. Have a good day.
Sure. Bye.